All right, in today's review assessment for slope-intercept form, we're going to talk about the following. And we're going to start with just a problem from each type of question that you'll see on your assessment. So the first one is when to find the slope of a line if I actually give you the graph, and you have to find these points. So I gave you the points, and now you have to find the rise and the run. So slope is the rise and the run, and so we're going to count boxes from one to the other. So this appears to go down 6. So my rise is a negative because it's going down. And then the run is going to be to the right 2, and 2 is a positive because it's going to the right. From there, I need to be able to simplify that. So I know my slope is going to be negative. So when I write this, I know it's going to be negative. And now if this is a whole number, I'm going to write it as a whole number. And in this case, it's -3. If you also look at the graph, you can see that this point right here falls on a grid line, and you could have also chosen that point as well. So your slope for this line is -3. The next example of finding a slope is when you're given 2 points without the graph. So in that case, I need to find my slope formula, and this is the one where it's y2 and y1. In this case, I'm going to label this as y2, and this is going to be my y1. When I plug them in, I'm going to do 2 minus 0. And I'm going to divide that by the x2 and the x1. I have to keep the 2's and the 1's together. So this is x2 and this is x1. My calculation is going to be 3, but don't forget this is a minus. So this is going to be minus and then a negative. And so when my calculation is 2 minus 0 is 2, and 3 minus -1 is +4, giving me a slope simplified of +1/2. The next example is to find the slope of a line, as we call this the rate of change. The rate of change is the change in value over time. At 5 o'clock, the temperature in Arizona was 75 degrees, and at 10 o'clock, the temperature was 95 degrees. What is the rate of change for this situation? So what is the change in temperature or change in value over time? In this case, from 5 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock in the morning, the time that had passed is 5 hours. And the temperature went from 75 to 95, so we subtract the final from the initial, and we find that the temperature rose 20 degrees in 5 hours. To simplify that, we would simplify it to 4 degrees Fahrenheit per 1 hour. This is the final answer that I'd be looking for, as it's simplified as a rate of change. The next example is when we're going to graph a line using the equation that's given. So if you remember in class, we identified the slope of the line and wrote it 2 different ways, -3 over +1. And then we switched where the negative went and went +3, but the negative went in the denominator. The B is my y-intercept. My y-intercept always has an x-coordinate of 2. X-coordinate of 0, a y-coordinate of 2, because that's the number that it tells me, and that's where I'm going to start. So I find my y-intercept, put a dot, and now I'm going to use the slope of the line. -3 in the rise means to go down 3, and +1 means to go to the right 1. So when I do my -3 over 1, my next dot should be right there. I follow that same pattern the opposite direction, and I could go +3, which is up 3, but then the -1 tells me to go to the left, and that new point is going to be right there. Now that I have 3 points, I can take my straight edge and I can draw a line by connecting those 3 points. And my graph looks like that. Finally, we're going to take a look at a graph, be able to identify the specific parts in order to write it in slope-intercept form as an equation. So the first thing I need to do is to find some points. The key points are obviously the y-intercept and another point to be able to calculate the slope. The y-intercept appears to be right there, And then I have some other points that look to be in that pattern. The y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. It crosses the y-axis at -1. And the slope of the line is how I go from one point to the next. So this tells me to go down 1 and right 1. So I could use it as -1 over +1. Or I could go up 1, making the numerator positive. But then I would go to the left, and that would make my denominator negative. Either way, my final equation is going to look something like y equals -1x minus 1. Another way to write that is to take the fraction away and simply just write it as y equals -x minus 1. Hopefully these problems helped you in reviewing for your assessment, and you can rewatch this video as many times as you need to help yourself with these concepts.